Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 12th day of the 108th Legislature, first special session. Our chaplain for today is Senator Ibaugh. Please rise.
Thank you. Please join me in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for today and for your many blessings. Today, Lord, we ask for protection over our families, for their health, for their welfare, and for their safety. We ask for your protection over our leadership, for our president, for our governor and his staff, for our mayors and city and county leaders. And as our state's youngest citizens return to the classroom this week, please give guidance and patience to our educators. And Lord, we ask for your guidance as we navigate policy and solutions that would serve all Nebraskans. Help us to seek to find compromise and understanding for the people of this great state. Lord, remind us to have wisdom in our convictions. Help us to be kind and thoughtful in our efforts, and help us to use words and actions that glorify you. Finally, Lord, help us to do your will and keep us all safe. We ask this in your name. Amen.
I recognize Senator Hansen for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I call to order the 12th day of the 108th Legislature, first special session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
I have no corrections this morning, sir.
Thank you. Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
Just one, Mr. President. Your Committee on General Affairs, chaired by Senator Lowe, reports Legislative Resolution 3CA to general file with committee amendments. That's all I have this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We will now proceed to the first item on the agenda. Please proceed.
Mr. President, first item on the agenda, Legislative Bill 2. Priority motion, Senator Conrad would move to indefinitely postpone the bill pursuant to Rule 6, Section 3F, MO 10.
Senator Wayne, please state your point.
I filed a motion to change the speaker agenda. I was wondering if the speaker is going to allow that agenda to be changed.
Senator Wayne, could you please come forward?
Senator Wayne, your motions were incidental main motions, so they were not scheduled, so we will proceed to LB2. This is not a ruling of the chair. That was a point of clarification for you, Senator Wayne. Mr. Clerk, please proceed.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 2, priority motion, Senator Conrad would move to indefinitely postpone pursuant to Rule 6, Section 3F.
Senator Conrad, you are recognized. Yeah. Sorry, Senator Clements, you're recognized to open on the bill before we get to Senator Conrad's opening.
Thank you, Madam President. LB2, and we're going to have LB3 as well, but LB2 and 3 provide funding to cover the increased property tax credit fund in LB34. LB2 that we're starting with is on pages 1, 2, and 3 of the handout from last night. LB2 was voted out of committee 7-1-1. Then the fiscal handout, page 1 and 2, shows what we're doing in fiscal year 2024. And LB2 deals with 2 fiscal years, 24, which ended June 30th of 2024, and then fiscal year 25, which we're in now, which will end next June 30th of 2025. The committee reviewed 22 state agencies with millions of dollars of unspent funds as of June 30th of 2024. We approved 76 million of 117 million of recommendations by the governor. Excuse me. I sent a handout this morning. You have a handout on your desk. It says Appropriations Budget Adjustment, Special Session 2024. The top section is a summary of what's in the booklet that has more detail. So the summary is on that one-page handout. Page 3 of the handout from fiscal is fiscal year 2025, which is our current fiscal year. We reviewed 19 agencies that did not spend all of their 2024 appropriation and have room to lower their fiscal year 2025 base appropriation. We approved $41 million of reductions of $69 million that the governor had recommended in LB2. The committee amendment on LB2 will be AM 39 when we get there. So LB2 covers $117 million of $185 million is needed in fiscal year 2025 to increase the property tax credit fund from LB 34. Then LB 3, which we'll consider later, will cover some of the rest of the $185 million. And the LB 3 is on pages 4 and 5 of the fiscal handout. So pages 1 and 2 show all of the LB2 requests that came from the governor. And there's a column that says governor, and then it shows the amendment, AM 39 committee amendment amounts in the committee column. And there also they listed some zero amount items. Those are the ones that the committee did not approve in the amendment. But just for your information, to show you what we did consider and what we approved and did not approve. The key was not taking away 100% of the 2024 unused dollars of each in an agency, and the amount not lapsed adds to the 2025 appropriations. So if they had $20 million they had not spent and we took out 10 million of it, then they still have $10 million that will add to their 2025 available appropriation. Page 3 also shows governor recommendations and the committee approvals in AM 39, which would be this fiscal year 2025. The committee approved 63% of the amounts that we were given in LB2 to keep from cutting agencies too close to the bone. This will ensure that LB 34 provides no loss in property tax credit to those who claim 30% once we fund the $185 million that we need for LB 34. But it also is going to mean this funding will give 100% property tax payers a property tax credit, and those who had not been claiming the credit will be given the full credit due them. And so that is that's a brief review of what the committee did. I wanted to thank the members of the Appropriation Committee for the work that we did. You'll see that we had dozens of items to consider, and we did deliberate, and by seeing that a number of items that we did not approve from the recommendations, we looked to make sure agencies were not going to be harmed. So it's my opinion that we have allocated funds for for the general fund, which should go to property tax relief without hurting any agencies involved. And with that, I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to open on your motion.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraska. I filed these motions, as has become our practice, to structure debate on critical issues, but also in seriousness and with seriousness of purpose. The budget bills that were introduced this session, and particularly after the body's deliberations and decisions that were reflected in our work together yesterday, represent unnecessary budgetary adjustments that we need to take up in this special session. So let me just start with a few overarching principles. Nebraska rightly has a balanced budget provision in our state constitution, and that's one key factor in why we are typically rated as one of the most fiscally responsible, fiscally solvent states in comparison to our sister states and, of course, the federal government. And so the citizens of Nebraska were wise in requiring this kind of fiscal responsibility in our budgetary work, and it guides each aspect of our deliberations when it comes to appropriations and budget. But let me be clear about how this balanced budget amendment, legal requirement, constitutional constraint works. We do not balance to the moment. We balance to the biennium. So we have complied with the constitutional provision, as we always do and appropriately should. We are balanced to the biennium. We are not balanced to the out years. We are not balanced to the moment. Ask any member of the Appropriations Committee or do the deliberations for yourself. There's absolutely no reason to move forward with any of the measures in LB 2 or 3. There's just not. Legally, there's not. No one is going to miss a payment. No one who receives a new front-loaded credit from 1107 as part of the deliberations on LB 34 yesterday is not going to receive that additional tax benefit. The majority of the proposals that nonetheless we received about 14 hours ago to make changes to our state budget, which is not responsible lawmaking and doesn't allow for thoughtful analysis and deliberations on something so important as our state finances. But of course, is by design to push things through in a compressed nature in this special session. But I think what's important to remember with the changes that are coming forward here, the lapses, the cuts, et cetera, the reappropriations, and we'll hear a lot about this over the next many hours and days, I'm sure. None of these actions are necessary to ensure that we remain in compliance with our balanced budget, as we always do and always should. And so we can easily make necessary adjustments when we reconvene in approximately, 4 months for our regular session to take up the next biennial budget and the work before the Nebraska Legislature. There is absolutely no reason to take these cuts, take these lapses, make these adjustments at this time. It is truly unnecessary and primarily performative. So that's the first piece that we need to be really clear about. There is no legal or fiscal reason to take these cuts at this point. They can easily be taken up in the regular session and should as part of a comprehensive, deliberative approach to crafting a biennial budget, as has always served us well. Additionally, as part of the debate this morning, I think we're going to have a significant opportunity to talk about the governor's dangerous and expansive view of executive power, which has been on full display during the term of his service to our great state, but has been particularly sharpened since we adjourned last session. And we saw almost immediately after we had adjourned from the regular session and had worked in good faith with the administration to make mid-biennium budget adjustments, we started to see this work, this shadow budgeting process start to come to light. And Senator Michaela Cavanaugh has detailed that very well, and I think we'll have a lot more discussion about it. But whether it's through an executive order that claims to be able to reappropriate millions of dollars due to finding some vacancy savings, which of course is not allowed under our Constitution, wherein we have a clear separation of powers, and the power of appropriation belongs solely to the people's branch in the legislature, not to the governor. And we'll have a chance to talk more about that. After that executive order came forward, months later, it revealed that after some splashy headlines and misleading rhetoric, in essence, it had resulted in very little. We'll also talk about the shadow budget process that has been undertaken in regards to our state agencies. And I've passed around some recent news reporting about these measures in case folks didn't have a chance to see them when they were issued by the media in real time. And I would ask that you look very, very carefully at the Flatwater Free Press story that came out and that highlights one of our own longtime distinguished servants in the Legislative Fiscal Office, Tom Bergquist, who has recently retired after decades of admirable service to our institution and to our state, highlighting the unprecedented nature of this shadow budget process and the inherent risks involved, and the fact that Nebraskans and Nebraska leaders need to pay careful attention to what's happening in this administration that has a reckless and expansive view of executive power, seeking to run roughshod over separation of powers and the people's branch of government. So please read that carefully. Tom has served in a nonpartisan way, in a credible way, and he's raising a red flag for all Nebraskans to take a look at. This shadow budget process that Governor Pillen's administration has engaged in is unprecedented and wrong. It seems to be tied, another thing that we'll be talking about today, to a state contract, which was a no-bid contract that the state of Nebraska paid millions of dollars and is on the hook for millions more moving forward to a company called Epiphany, which has put forward a very limited initial report about how the state is going to address waste, fraud, abuse, and fine savings. Now, to be fair, those are good goals, laudable goals that we all share and are good for the legislature to focus on. But we've paid millions of dollars to an out-of-state consultant in a no-bid contract to tell us what we already know. Get more federal funds. DED has some slush funds. And then they suggest that we should perhaps raid the cash reserve. Those are some of the key findings from the Epiphany report, along with, of course, an appendix which borders upon, if not triggers, a legal violation by cutting and pasting the governor's campaign materials into a state document and distributing those with state resources. So these are some of the overarching themes and will continue to connect these dots.
1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. The other piece that I want to lift up is the dual nature of the cuts before us, now in the revised version of LB 34 as amended and in the budgetary proposals, wherein we will be really hurting the most vulnerable in our communities through the budgetary caps on the local level in LB 34 as amended, and through deep cuts in programs and services in the budget bills before us for LB 2 and 3. So with that, I look forward to a continued debate. None of these bills are necessary. We should quickly IPP them, continue our work on 34, and adjourn. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator McKinney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in support of the motion to IPP. I think it's really crazy that we're even considering making cuts to the most important departments that our state have, the Department of Health and Harm and the Department of Punitive Services. They already have issues, and we want to cut their budgets for whatever type of relief that we would like to get to that will eventually cause more harm. And there are examples from the past when we cut budgets of harm happening because of budget cuts. But I don't think people care about harming people, obviously, but that's what's going to happen when you cut these budgets to corrections and DHHS. But I'll yield the rest of my time to Senator Wayne.
Senator Wayne, you're yielded 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator McKinney. So, colleagues, I dropped a motion to recess until 9:40. It's going to come up after I'm done talking. I'll tell you why this is important. The governor called us here to do some work. We are here. We should do some work. Brant has a bill, LR 2CA, that will go on the ballot if we would pass it before September, and also with the underlying statute changes, that will allow us in the next session be able to do owner-occupied and distinguish between property taxes. This is the biggest issue that we can fundamentally change our property tax code. Right now, you have a motel and a hotel that is treated the same as a house. We should be able to distinguish that, but our Constitution does not allow to. And this is the only opportunity we're going to have, based on the schedule we have going forward, is to move that today. You move it to general file, we can move it by Friday and get it on the ballot. This is it. Else we're going to hamstring the next session because it can't happen until another general session or a statewide election, which won't happen for 2 more years. So I filed a poll motion. I filed a motion to change the speaker agenda. Didn't happen. So what I'm asking for is to recess. Now hear me out on this vote. Vote for the recess if you believe we should be able to do it. If you are a little afraid of changing the speaker agenda, be present not voting. Show the speaker that we're not going to have a filibuster on this issue, because everybody I've talked to said it's a great issue. Show the speaker that it's not going to change the schedule, and let's take back our legislature and make sure that we're going to do some work that we've been required to do. This is a non-controversial bill. We could pass this today. So I'm just asking for a brief recess, and this is a test vote to show the speaker that we can actually move this along without breaking up the schedule. So I'd ask for you to give us a recess till 9:40. And if you don't want to overturn the agenda or you don't want to go against the speaker, just be present not voting. If you're voting no on this, you're saying you're against Brant's bill. So we can at least know. This is too important of an issue to Nebraska for us not to get this done today. It's not my bill, but I worked on it as urban affairs chair for years, and he came up with language that I didn't come up with. He took the ag language and made it work. I praise him for that, because I was trying to do it my first 3 years and I couldn't figure out how to make it so confusing, and he did. This is critical on how we do property taxes. So if we're going to give the tools to the next legislature to do something else, and maybe we could even do it this session if we really wanted to take time and work on it, we can start separating out residential homes from commercial facilities and commercial businesses. If you are in a duplex, for example,
1 minute.
We can actually do owner occupied separate from the other person who's renting. You could actually set up property taxes that way. This is true way for us to come with a system that works. So I don't know what to do, but I'm down here working, I'm losing money, so I'm doing everything that I can to get something done. And this is a way that we can get something done. So I ask for a green vote to pause for 3 minutes to show the speaker this is a non-controversial issue that we need to pass this year. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne and Senator McKinney. Mr. Clerk, for an item.
Madam President, a priority motion. Senator Wayne would move to recess the body until 9:40 a.m.
Senator Arch is the only one as speaker who's allowed to speak to this. I recognize Senator Arch.
Thank you, Madam President. I understand the frustration. I understand the frustration born largely of a special session. Largely of a special session to tackle a very complex problem. And if we don't understand the complexities, yesterday should have illuminated that for all of us. This is a very complex problem. There are very many factors involved with the issue of property taxes and fairness and efficiency and equality and all of the issues involved in our taxation policies. I only speak to the process that we have been following. The process was clear from the beginning. When we convened on January 25, everything pointed to yesterday. Yesterday was the revenue bill. Yesterday was the work of 67 hearings in the Revenue Committee. The committee was subject matter jurisdiction. The appropriation bills are now on the schedule, ready to be heard to follow LB 34, which passed yesterday. There have been, in a special session, of course, we understand there are no priority bills. And this is part of the frustration. There are no priority bills. LR 2CA could have very well been a priority bill in a general session, in which case that probably would have been scheduled. As it is, we have been following a process. The Revenue Committee's bill, followed by the appropriation, the funding bills, follow that process to conclusion. I've indicated previously that at the conclusion of that, there would be an opportunity, and I am assuming that that would take the form of a sine die motion. It is at that point that the body can decide to stay in session to hear other bills. I would ask that you vote no on this recess motion, but I'm laying it before the body. This is unprecedented, seems to be the word of the day, or the word of the last 2 years. Unprecedented. This session is unprecedented to tackle this issue, and now we have this question before the body. I'm asking you to follow the process to work these bills out to the end, and at that point, then the body can decide whether to stay in session to hear more bills. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Arch. Senator Wayne, I have a priority motion, so we're going to vote on the priority motion. The question before the body is recess until 9:40. There's been a request for a roll call vote.
The question before the body is to recess now. All those in favor? I withdraw my motion.
The motion has been withdrawn. Senator Dungan, you are recognized to speak as we return to the queue on LB2.
Thank you, Madam President. I would love some precedented times. That would be really nice. But I will yield the remainder of my time to Senator Wayne.
Senator Wayne, you're yielded 4 minutes, 45 seconds.
Place the House under call.
There's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor, please vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
25 ayes, 7 nays, Madam President, to place the House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. All unexcused senators are now here. Senator Wayne, you may continue.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, the process has changed already. We were supposed to be here on a Saturday. We moved that day. We've moved and we've been ebbing and flowing all the time. This is not me challenging the speaker. This is me doing my job for my community. What it comes down to is this is a LR2CA. We are only, if you pass the LR2CA, it goes to the vote of the people. This is not us changing property taxes tomorrow if this bill passes. What this says is that the next legislature has a tool in the toolbox that we currently don't have, which is simply to allow owner-occupied, which is residential, to be different than some commercial, and even distinguish among residential. Again, the best example is a duplex. One is an owner-occupied, one is a renter. Those could be treated differently. Not saying we should, not saying it's a policy decision I want to make here today, but we can at least give the legislature next year that opportunity if the voters decide. Again, this is clear that we are simply asking the voters to make a decision, and I'll yield the rest of my time to Senator Brandt.
Senator Brandt, you are Senator Wayne, you can't yield time since you were yielded time. So Senator Brandt, will you yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
Senator Brandt, can you explain your constitutional amendment?
Better yet, I will read it. It's all of 6 lines. And it states, the legislature may provide that owner-occupied housing, as defined by the legislature, shall constitute a separate and distinct class of property for purposes of taxation, and may provide for a different method of taxing owner-occupied housing, which results in values that are not uniform or proportionate with all other real property and franchises, but which results in values that are uniform and proportionate upon all property within the class of owner-occupied housing. I modeled this after what we do for agriculture. Today in ag, for those of you that don't know, ag land is valued at 75% of valuation, and the legislature can move that number. When that started several years ago, it was 80%, and when times got tough, they dropped it to 75. The legislature can move these numbers. What this does, and the reason this is important, is the people have to approve this to change the Constitution. Without the people of the state approving this, you're locked in. You're locked in. The factory and the house are the same thing. The house that's owned by the real estate investment trust that we're all concerned about that are buying our houses in this state, and grandma next door are all treated the same. What this says is somebody that owns the property has the opportunity to be treated differently by the legislature. Today, we cannot do that.
So why is it critical that we get this done before September 3rd with the underlining statute change that'll have to happen?
So that it gets on the ballot. So it gets on the November ballot so that the people can decide if they want to change the Constitution by this.
Thank you. And so again, I am not asking you to go against the speaker, so I'm giving you 2 options. If you believe in Brandt's bill, take a pause until 9:50. Show the speaker that we can all get along. We're not going to filibuster Brandt's bill and the underlining statute. We can move this along so the people can decide. If you're a little hesitant, just be present, not voting. If we can show that this is not
1
going to
minute.
take a long time, but we can move this forward, we can get this scheduled and get this to the vote of the people. Thank you. And again, this is not a vote saying we're going to do it. We're going to change it this year. It's just to ask the people of Nebraska to vote on this issue. So with that, I would ask you for a green vote or a present not voting, preferably a green vote, so we can show a strong unity behind this idea. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Mr. Clerk, for a priority motion.
Madam President, Senator Wayne would move to recess the body until 9:55 a.m.
Speaker Arch is the only one recognized to speak on this issue. You're recognized.
Thank you, and I won't take it to 9:55, so we can get to a vote here. I just want to say one thing. This bill was before the Revenue Committee, of course. The Revenue Committee chose not to put it into the package, chose not to fold that in, which they could have. Many other bills came to the Revenue Committee, and I'm sure there are many sitting here listening to this. They're saying like, well, I got a bill sitting there in the Revenue Committee that also should be out on this floor. Here's what I'm asking. I'm asking LR2CA can be heard when we have completed our process with the appropriations and moved the revenue package, the appropriations bills through, or not. It's that time that the body can decide. We don't have to insert this at this time. We can do that at the end, and the body can decide to stay in session, and many bills could be heard if that is the choice. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Speaker Arch. There's been a request for a roll call vote. The question is whether to recess till 9:55. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Aguilar, voting no. Senator Albright, voting no. Speaker Arch, voting no. Senator Armendariz, voting no. Senator Ballard, oh, excuse me, Senator Armendariz not voting. Senator Ballard, voting no. Senator Blood, voting yes. Senator Boston, not voting. Senator Bostar, Senator Bostelman, voting no. Senator Brandt, not voting. Senator Brewer, not voting. Senator John Kavanaugh, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, Senator Clements, voting no. Senator Conrad, voting yes. Senator Day, Senator DeBoer, not voting. Senator DeKay, voting no. Senator Dorn, not voting. Senator Dover, not voting. Senator Dungan, voting yes. Senator Erdman, voting yes. Senator Frederickson, voting yes. Senator Holleran, voting yes. Senator Hansen, voting no. Senator Hardin, voting no. Senator Holcroft, voting no. Senator Hughes, Senator Hunt, voting yes. Senator Ibach, voting no. Senator Jacobson, Senator Kauth, voting no. Senator Linehan, Senator Lippincott, voting no. Senator Lowe, Senator McDonald, voting yes. Senator McKinney, voting yes. Senator Meyer, voting no. Senator Mosier, voting no. Senator Merman, not voting. Senator Raybold, Senator Reapy, not voting. Senator Sanders, voting no. Senator Slama, Senator Vargas, voting yes. Senator Von Gillern, voting no. Senator Walls, voting yes. Senator Wayne, voting yes. Senator Wishart, voting yes. Votes 13 ayes, 17 nays, Madam President, to recess the body.
The motion is not successful. I raise the call. Returning to the queue, Senator McDonald, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, colleagues. I want to thank the Fiscal Office Appropriations Committee. The process that we're going right now is the same thing we do for the last 8 years for me being a member of the Appropriations Committee. And the idea the governor proposes, we depose, and we start looking at what we agree with and disagree with, and then we bring it to you. And so this is, as Appropriations Committee members, we're all available to answer any of your questions. Now switching back to Senator Wayne and what he had just brought to us. As I mentioned yesterday, we cannot think that a success is leaving here and getting nothing done. I'm not saying you have to agree with the governor. I'm not saying you have to agree with me or Senator Wayne, but this is no longer the governor's problem. This is ours. It's been put into our court. So how do we do this? How do we go through this process fairly? How do we make sure, which I support Senator Brandt's constitutional amendment, And I'd like to get it out on the ballot for November 5th for the people to vote on. How do we go through that process? Speaker, I support the speaker with the idea that at the end of going through the process with LB 2 now and the idea of when would we schedule this, I think we should start scheduling them now. Here it is, day 12. We know what we did yesterday, and I'm not saying that that's not part of the process, but I think we can be more effective and efficient with our time. And I know there's 81 bills that were introduced. There's 24 CAs that were introduced. We've gone through that process. And I think a lot of people out there don't know this, that are watching us or calling us or emailing or texting us, that we have been doing a lot of work since we came back on the 26th of July. We have. It's day 12, but there's been a lot of work. That's 12 days standing here on the floor. I just don't think people quite understand that, but there's a lot of good ideas that have been introduced, that are sitting in committees, that I think we should take the time. The governor starts a special session, we end it. We're not under a time constraint right now. I know we all have lives, we all have things going on. It doesn't mean we can't pause. It doesn't mean we can't work on things. It doesn't mean that we can't come back. But also, it doesn't mean that also Senator Wayne's idea is not a good idea. I yield the remainder of my time, Senator Wayne.
Senator Wayne, you're yielded 2 minutes, 32 seconds.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Senator McDonald. So colleagues, there was some misinformation spoken by the speaker. I need to correct the record. You cannot incorporate a constitutional amendment into a committee package of bills. A constitutional amendment has to stand on its own. So if that persuaded your vote in any way, then just know that going forward, constitutional amendment has to stand on its own. And the reason is it doesn't go to the governor to be signed. After 30 people vote on a constitutional amendment here, it goes to the Secretary of State to be placed on the ballot. That's why you can't mix the two. You can't have a bill with the constitutional amendment. It doesn't never get to the governor. We make that decision. So just understand that I'm going to correct some misinformation because we need to make sure the record's correct on how we do things around here. My biggest frustration right now is we have some tools that we are not talking about. To say that the Revenue Committee didn't exec on it and that's why they didn't kick it out is just false. They have been dealing with the one thing they were supposed to do with the bill. And actually, there are many people on the Revenue Committee who support the bill. And if Senator Linehan was here, I would ask her to exec underneath the chair, underneath the balcony, just to kick it out. The reality is we have a tool in the toolbox we are not using. And we're trying to argue about raising taxes, closing exemptions. Now we're talking about cuts. But at the end of the day, we're leaving an important tool, not even for discussion.
1 minute.
So we're going to have a lot more discussions now that we're on LB2. And it is going to take a while because I believe the vote yesterday is directly tied to LB2. And I want to know from some people who voted for LB 34 how they're not directly tied together. Because my understanding is there's a delta. There's a delta from the property tax credit fund that has to get done. And that delta is coming from these cuts. So we're going to ask some appropriators if that's true or not and what that means, because you can't take a vote on that and champion that you took a vote for property tax relief on the backs of cutting some of our most vulnerable agencies and think that's going to be okay. So we're going to have some real conversations about that. At least I'm going to be asking directly some people who voted for that bill yesterday about the connection. And they're going to have to explain to me the difference. Because right now, what I heard yesterday is the delta is being paid for by these cuts. So somebody can tell me differently. But at the end of the day, thank you. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Conrad, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Again, good morning, colleagues. I appreciate my good friend Senator Wayne's always creative approach to utilizing legislative process to elevate really important issues that otherwise might not be before us on the agenda. So thanks to his smart, good work in elevating the measure that Senator Brandt brought forward, that I think should and will enjoy broad support to advance that to the ballot this fall. It sounds like Senator Wayne's excellent utilization of procedure to elevate that substance, whether or not we take it up in a motion to reset or change the agenda, whether or not it provokes a pull motion or additional committee work, or perhaps even find its way as part of an amendment in LB 34 or related thereto that will continue to move through the remainder of the session. I also look forward to continuing the dialogue and deliberation in regards to LB 2 and 3. I think that there are a host of critical issues there, but I think that what's really important to remember is if you ask any member of the Appropriations Committee, they can tell you we don't need to take any of the actions in regards to LB 2 and 3. It is not legally required. It is not fiscally required. It can easily be taken up in regards to our budgetary process to look at the budget appropriately and comprehensively in a few months, in the spirit of dynamic cooperation with the executive branch, as we have always done and is required by our process. But there's no need to take these cuts now to pay for anything related to what the body's moving forward with LB 34. And in fact, again, it really highlights the dual nature or cruelty that would go with certain aspects of LB 34 to then exacerbate the potential cuts in services for the most vulnerable contained in LB 2. So when we move forward with caps on the local level and rightly exempt out public safety from the risk of the governor's plan in regards to the cuts, which is what it is and speaks for itself, what you're leaving the cap on, and I understand from talking to our partners in local government across the state, is that public safety exemption is particularly helpful for the largest metro areas in Nebraska and has pronounced and pernicious effects for our partners in rural Nebraska, because the caps themselves will apply most harshly to critical infrastructure like roads, like bridges, like mental health care, like senior services, pools, libraries, those critical quality of life things that make our communities vibrant and special and that are utilized by all citizens, but particularly seniors and citizens of limited means. So by putting forward a very cruel plan in relation to the cuts and the caps in LB4 and the cuts in LB2, it really is kind of a double whammy in terms of reducing services for the most vulnerable in Nebraska. I'm hopeful we'll be able to make requisite adjustments to the caps as designed in LB 34 before it hits final reading and goes to the governor's desk. And I appreciate our partners in local government speaking out on this as things are moving so quickly during the special session. But let's be clear. Thank you, Madam President. We don't need to take any of the cuts. We don't need to take any of the cuts in LB 2 or 3. And I am going to work in good faith with my colleagues here and in the governor's office to try and find a middle ground so that we can proceed expeditiously with this manner. I think the Appropriations Committee has done a great job whittling down the proposal. I think if we were able to get a little bit farther along in sparing the most vulnerable additional burden of these cuts, we could hopefully move quickly, because the rest is generally seems to be administrative kind of machinations between different lapses in cash funds, which wouldn't be as harmful, but again, is also unnecessary. So if folks want that performative result, we can work to do that. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Erdman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning. On the Appropriations Committee, we worked very hard at trying to figure out what we do so it doesn't affect services or prevent an agency from functioning correctly. And yesterday, there were comments made about taking money from the Legislative Council. And I want to bring to your attention a couple of things so that you understand how much money there was and how much money there will remain. So the appropriation for the Legislative Council last year was 17.5 million. The actual expenses was 11.2, which left an excess of 6.2 million. The committee approved a $3.5 million transfer, which remained to be 2.7 was left for carryover or for future remaining funding, plus the new appropriations is 13 million. So we have 15.7 million going forward for the Legislative Council when our expenditures for last year was 11.2. So there are sufficient funds there. That's one example, and every one of these agencies that we took a portion of their excess has been left in a position that they have more funding than they had the prior year to make sure they have the revenue to continue. When it comes to game and parks, there were 4 funds and I had recommended we take it all, but I didn't get any seconds, so we didn't do that one. But I would have taken it all if I could. So those are just examples, and I have a list of all of those that we dealt with. One of the things that came to my attention and the committee's attention was the amount of cash that the University of Nebraska has. The University of Nebraska system has a net cash amount of $584 million. That's about 211 days of operating capital, 211. To put it in perspective, if the state of Nebraska had 211 days of operating capital, we would have 3.06 billion. That gives you an example of how much excess funds the university has. The one account, the one fund that surprised me was the university cash fund. That's where the money goes that they collect for fees and tuition. That balance is $306 million in that account, and they chose to raise tuition 3.5%. If you're a student or if you have a child going to the university and they raised your tuition 3.5%, you should be totally upset that they have $306 million in excess and they raised your tuition. The state contributes about $691 million on top of that to the university. The university has plenty of money to do whatever they need to do whenever they want to do it, if they choose to do so. But what they do is they spend the $691 million that we, the state of Nebraska citizens, give them. And once that's gone, then they're broke. That's not the case. And I told Senator Holleran, just when one figures out where all the bodies are buried, you're termed out. I would recommend next year, when the budget comes from the University of Nebraska, they get zero. No additional appropriations. $691 million is sufficient. If you want to really do property tax relief, privatize the University of Nebraska and take the $700 million and give it to property tax relief. We, the committee, are bringing forward a bill
1 minute.
that has been very well thought out and voted on and approved. And we're trying to make sure that those agencies who need money to do the services they do have sufficient funds to do that. I would recommend you follow my lead, like the speaker said yesterday, and vote yes on LB2. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Wisher, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, first of all, want to thank the Appropriations Committee for the diligent work we did on these 2 budget items. I'm going to really miss this committee. We come from different parts of the state, different political affiliations, and I think we work really well together. For me, I see a path forward for us being able to support the property tax relief efforts that are going on this special session, but one of my hard lines is not doing that with any cuts to the Department of Health and Human Services. And so what I'd like for us to figure out over the course of these next few days and in the debate today is how we're able to make the decisions that we passed yesterday, some of the other opportunities we have that Senator Wayne has spoken about. I will put a plug in there for expanding sports gaming as one I'd like to see it come out of this session as well. And part of that is tightening our belts. And I think for the most part, what we are presenting to you today, I think is very well thought out ways for us to reduce expenses without harming care for Nebraskans. But I do have concerns, which is why I did not vote this bill out of committee with the $25 million cut to the Department of Health and Human Services. I would need more time to be able to fully understand what the implications of that would be, which is why I am working to see if there is an alternative approach for us to remove that and be able to pass this forward and continue on our journey to provide sensible property tax relief to Nebraskans. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Senator Aguilar, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank Senator Clements and the Appropriations Committee for their work on the committee amendment AM 39. As introduced, LB 2 would have made significant cuts to the Legislative Council budget, to the extent that would have negatively impaired our operations as a separate branch of government. Unlike most state agencies, historically, the budgets for both the legislature and the Supreme Court have any unspent general funds at the end of the biennium reappropriated to the agency. These reappropriated funds reduce the need for new general fund appropriations each budget cycle and provide the legislature with the flexibility to address unexpected projects and contractual needs as they arise without needing to seek new appropriations. Because nearly 90% of the Legislative Council budget consists of staff salaries and benefits, the legislature must frequently rely on reappropriated funds to undertake major projects. For example, when the clerk's office needed to replace the video boards in the chamber in 2021, we had to rely on reappropriated funds to make this critical update. Similarly, when a delay in the HVAC project prevented us from being able to use room 1003 at the start of the 2023 session, only because of the availability of reappropriated funds were we able to convert room 1307 into a temporary hearing room for the Appropriations Committee. The Legislative Council is already utilizing reappropriated funds to finance a variety of items in our current budget, including replacing laptop computers, staffing for the video archive library, staff salary increases that went into effect on July 1, pay advancements which will go into effect on January 1, and contracts with outside counsel regarding the Attorney General's opinion on the constitutionality of the offices of Inspector General. Reappropriated funds are currently being utilized in most of our budgetary programs for operating expenses and employees' benefits, as our general fund appropriations cannot fully fund salaries and benefits for all legislative employees. The program impacted by LB2, Legislative Services, is the largest program within the legislature's budget and includes funding for senators' per diem salaries and operating expenses for senators' offices, travel reimbursements, and the Legislative Accounting and Budget Office, the coordinator of legislative service, and a wide variety of contracts approved by the Executive Board. While our legislative services budget can shoulder this one-time lapse of reappropriated funds, any further reduction in reappropriated funds beyond what is contained in LB 39 would create the need for additional general fund appropriations in the future. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Aguilar. Senator Wayne, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I yield my time to Senator Duncan.
Senator Duncan, you're yielded 4 minutes, 54 seconds.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Senator Wayne. I know this morning we've had a lot of really interesting discussions, and I really do appreciate kind of where we've come so far. Colleagues, I rise today undecided, I guess, about where we currently are on LB2, and undecided of how I feel about the IPP with regards to the budget cuts or these lapses in reappropriations. The top notes of what we're talking about here, I think, is a broad concern that in a time of overall economic prosperity, we continue to ratchet down our budget. Now, I understand, as we talked about yesterday, that part of the plan that's been outlined by our governor and his proposals is an effort to cut government spending. But there is a difference between cutting government spending that is unnecessary and cutting government spending that we utilize to provide essential services for the people of our state. And I become incredibly concerned when I start going through this budget book or this budget proposal and I see cuts from essential services, not the least of which is the Foster Care Review Board, the Crime Commission, but then most importantly in my mind is DHHS, the Department of Health and Human Services. I understand the governor originally proposed taking a larger amount out, but the proposal that we have before us in LB2 as it came out of the committee still takes $15 million, it looks like, out of administration for DHHS. Now, on the face of it, when somebody says administration, they assume that means, I don't know, people working in cubicles, which, by the way, are also essential workers for all of my DHHS friends who are watching right now. But in reality, when you're taking $15 million from a program like DHHS, you're going to see ripple effects inevitably into essential services. What I want to focus on today, we have a lot of folks talking big picture. I want to drill down to some really specific examples. And one of those is the potential effects that we're going to see on the developmental disability services that we currently have. Here in Nebraska, we have a crisis right now when we're talking about our friends in the DD, the developmental disability community, and the behavioral health community. That's not hyperbole, colleagues. May 14th of this year, we received a letter from the U.S. Department of Justice outlining that we as a state are doing an inadequate job in providing services for those in the DD community. Not just an inadequate job insofar as we wish it was better, but in fact, the letter finds that Nebraska is currently violating Title II of the ADA by unnecessarily segregating people with serious mental illness, SMI, in assisted living facilities and day program facilities. The state's administration, it goes on to say, of behavioral health services places others at serious risk of such unnecessary segregation in those facilities. This, I believe, 17-page letter describes the United States finding and the steps the state can take to remedy the ADA violations that we identify below. So I'm going to talk, I think, a few times today. This is not a filibuster. It's an important issue to get on the record and have the public see. But I'm going to talk a few times today about this because if you follow the legislature, you know that the DD world is very personal for me, but I know it's also personal for almost every single person in this body and every single person out in Nebraska. The way that we as a state treat those who are often left behind and often ignored tells you what you need to know about us. And when we have a Department of Health and Human Services that continues to slash funds and say that they can absorb these cuts while still providing and increasing customer service, I just don't see how that works. When I talk to any of my folks out in the business community and I say, you know, is it possible for you to—
1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. To continue to provide the same level of service without as much revenue? In some circumstances, you might find ways to do that. But at the end of the day, if we are cutting the amount of money we're giving an organization, it is going to have an effect on services. Providing services for the developmental disabilities community is not a business. Tightening your belt and finding ways to cut fat around the edges can be a laudable goal in some circumstances, but when it comes to providing essential services to make sure that we are in compliance with the Olmstead Act under the United States Supreme Court and to make sure that we are in compliance with the ADA is not a business. We cannot just trim fat around the edges. We have to make sure that our friends are being appropriately provided for and that we're not unlawfully segregating them in facilities. So colleagues, I'm going to drill a little bit more into this as the day goes on. I hope we continue to have a good conversation about the budget, but when we're talking about cuts to essential services,
Time, Senator.
we have to be vigilant. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator Armendariz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Just to be clear, I am on appropriations and we did not cut behavioral health aid, nor did we lapse the excess funds that they have available to them. Same with public assistance, same with disability aid. All of those funds remain what they were when we entered this special session. What appropriations was tasked with was finding excess funds that were not being spent by departments. I think it is fair for the governor to come in as a new governor and say, this is the way we will budget going forward. I think it is a responsibility of, quite frankly, all 49 of us, but especially in appropriations, to evaluate the funds in all of the agencies to see if there are any unspent funds. I guarantee in appropriations we did do that. We asked a lot of questions, making sure no fund would be unviable after the lapses. We left them still with excess funds. No programs were to be cut. These are funds that are lapsed over and over again, year over year. We did not look just last year. We looked back sometimes 5 years back and how much they carry over year. We had the same conversation during regular session this spring. I think it is a responsibility of the Appropriations Committee to look at these funds every single year to find out what is not being spent. These funds are taxpayer funds. If we have over appropriated funds, it is right to send those funds back to the taxpayer or reallocate them to something the taxpayer is saying they want them spent on. In this case, in the special session, they are saying we want them spent on property tax relief. That is where taxed with in the special session and appropriations. We have found some, not all of the recommendations of the governor, but we have found some monies to put in property tax relief because of funds that were not being spent in agencies. As far as DHS, this is the first agency, I believe the first agency the audit company has started to look into as of last July. With an audit, it is the intent of any audit in any business to go in and see how the business is being run, see if there are efficiencies that can be made, see if we can actually serve people better and more people. That is the outcome usually of audits. Oftentimes there comes savings with that. So it is expected to see DHHS have these savings, being the first agency being audited. We did ask questions to make sure no child welfare was being cut, with DHHS offering their administrative lapse back to the general fund. And they assured none of those required services were going to be cut with the lapse of their administrative fees. I am confident that that is true. All of the appropriations team members are available for questions today. I encourage to ask. We were in those meetings for several days asking in-depth questions. We know the answers. Also, the fiscal analysts are on the floor. Ask them any question in depth. Please don't make assumptions, ask the questions. I appreciate your time. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Armendariz. Senator Dover, you're recognized.
Thank you. I'm probably going to echo a lot of what has been said by those on appropriations. But having talked to Speaker Scheer, a past speaker, just talking about spending and things like that, and I came to realize that there was a lot of money that was sitting in agencies that was not being utilized. Kind of, they had their own rainy day fund, and I'm talking millions and millions and millions of dollars. And when I came down here, that was actually a goal I had, and I was on appropriations that I was going to try to find this money, which that's not our money, that's the people's money. And if there's money sitting there that isn't necessarily ear tagged for this or that, I don't think it's right for us to hold that money. We should give that money back. And I really believe that is what we're doing with LB 2 and 3, is we're giving the money back. We're making through budget cuts and looking at lapses and things. So I was going to come down and do that. The governor beat me to it. And I do believe, I know everyone's thinking like the governor's controlling everything or this or that, or he's pushing this and we need to operate independent as a legislature. And that we definitely do. But we all know that basically the governor provides his budget, and that realistically we look at the governor's budget, review that, and we agree or disagree on what the governor is recommending. And that's been going on, as far as I know, forever. And so my question is, how many rainy day funds do we need? Do we have a rainy day fund that has approaching $1 billion in it? Does every agency then also need a rainy day fund? And I don't blame them. I think I've seen it in whether it's school boards, organizations, Nebraska Realtors Association, all of them have so many days of operating, right, just in case. And so we looked at that, and we did look at the overall cost of the agency, what it would take to operate. They probably need a little bit, but do they need as much as they had? And in some cases, we decided that they didn't need as much money as they were sitting on. And I'll tell you this, is anytime you go into an agency, and even with the legislative when we went to look, and we treated everyone the same. We treated ourselves as the same, and we had some ideas for some cuts or whatever, and we agreed on half of them. And then, of course, the argument with the executive committee was, some on the executive committee was this: is, well, what if this happens? What if we get sued? What if? And every agency can make that decision, and if we really need to, we can appropriate the funds. So I don't think people should sit on millions and millions of dollars on a bunch of what ifs, and isn't that what our cash reserve fund is for? And one danger in having agencies having a reappropriated amounts or amount that lapses into the next years, and we looked, if it lapsed and it lapsed and it lapsed, we look at the income, but if it's been there for years in and year out, do they really need that? And I'll say they don't, because why don't they spend? If they really need it, shouldn't that money be spent? And I'll just use those specifics so people understand. So when I came down here, I found out that basically the starting salaries, so at LA, an AA and an LA, were $15 and $17 respectively. That, I thought, my God, are you kidding me? My staff gets $15 and $17 an hour. And we did a raise, and thank God for Senator Linehan, who came in with raises to get those up, because she was looking for, I think, legal counsel or whatever in her committee, and couldn't believe what she could go to the market for to hire that expertise. She couldn't compete. So we appropriated that money, which means we earmarked that money so that money could not be taken away, because we wanted to make sure that the AAs and the LA received, and other staff, obviously here at the Capitol, received the money that they are due, so they can get paid for their level and for what of experience and what they do here. And then the governor vetoed it. Thank you. And the governor vetoed that. Why? He said, look, you've got plenty of money. You don't need to appropriate the money. Just use the money you have sitting there. And that is reoccurring everywhere. And I'm just concerned that we need to appropriate, basically rebase on what's important, so that's earmarked so it can't be taken away. And we shouldn't be just using leftover monies to actually fund the government. You wouldn't do that in a regular business. You would have this money's for this, earmarked for this is earmarked for that, this for salaries, this for that, and not have a slush fund. Slush fund is sloppy, and that's what we're attempting to take care of. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dover. Senator Frederickson, you're recognized.
Oh, hello. There you go. Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraskans. I want to just kind of start this. I appreciate the conversation. And as we talk about appropriation bills, I really appreciate the work of the Fiscal Office and the Appropriations Committee. They work very hard every year, obviously. And in the circumstances we're in, they've been working even extra hard this year, because we're looking to adjust and change the budget that we all agreed upon for the biennium. So just an acknowledgement of the hard work that's been going on there. I have a few comments, and I guess I want to talk about this more from a global perspective, and almost just kind of speak both to my colleagues in the room, but to Nebraskans back home who might be wondering, why are we debating the budget? Why are we talking about the budget? What does this all mean? And almost kind of take this back to a basic civics lessons of sorts. And our founding fathers were very intentional in how they designed funding, taxation, and revenue. And they prescribed to the legislative branch the exclusive power to control spending and taxation. And the reason that this is so important in Nebraska, but also nationally, is that this allows for direct representation from across the entire state in the budget decision-making process. There's diversity of perspective. There are checks and balances that we have within this legislative chamber. And having the legislature have that exclusive right to the power of the purse is essential. Now, it's been mentioned, the executive branch is certainly entitled to goals and visions and perspectives on what the state's budget looks like, but they do not have the authority to control the state's budget. That's true for the state of Nebraska, but that's also true for the United States of America. And there's very good reason for this. We don't want to have a lack of direct representation single-handedly making the decision on how taxpayer dollars are spent. We have 49 senators who represent diverse geographic regions of our state, which all have very different financial needs. That is why we, as the legislature, have the authority to make these decisions. I also want to remind colleagues that government is not a business. Nor should government be run like a business. Government exists to ensure the safety and well-being of the people. Businesses exist to make profit. Two very different fundamental goals and purposes. So I fully understand that as we discuss LB2 and LB3, we as a legislature are going to be deciding on whether or not to make adjustments to our budget. But I also want to remind my colleagues that we decided on this budget for the biennium in 2023, and we revisited this in April of this year and approved it for the remainder of the biennium. Thank you, Madam President. And we're also going to be going through this entire process again in January for an entirely new biennium, where every agency is going to have to come in front of the Appropriations Committee. They're going to have to make their case. They are going to have to share why they may or may not be sitting on funds and why they may or may not need those funds. That is the work of the legislative branch. That is how it has always been done in our state. That is how it has been done for this biennium. And that is how it should continue to be done. We need to ensure that we are continuing to maintain the power of the purse within this chamber, because that is what is best for our citizens, and that is what is best for the taxpayers in our state. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Frederickson. Senator Clements, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to discuss a few items that have been brought up today. First one, you'll see on page 1 of the handout, Legislative Council, which Chairman Aguilar talked about. The line, the very first line shows $3.5 million of reduction of the unspent money from June 30th of this year. When we analyze that, the appropriation for the Legislative Council was $17.5 million last year. They spent $11.2 million, and they had $6.2 million of unspent dollars. Of the $6.2 million, we're proposing $3,500,000. And so that leaves $2.7 million of the unspent dollars carrying forward to this fiscal year. And the new appropriation for this fiscal year is $13 million, plus the 2.7 carrying forward will be $15.7 million available for the Legislative Council services. That 15.7 million is compared to actual expenditures of 11.2 million last fiscal year, which we could spend $4.3 million more than what we did last year and have money to cover it. I did a presentation to the executive board. Part of the governor's proposal was also to remove $2.5 million from this fiscal year, 2025, and the committee did not take those items. There were in two programs. And so we left $2.5 million in that had been proposed, which is why the Legislative Council will have $4.5 million available for this fiscal year, above what was spent last year. And when I did the presentation to the executive board, I was feeling I didn't have pushback. I believe they were acceptable to what I told them I was going to propose. And Senator Aguilar has expressed his opinion, but I think the opinion of the other board members was reasonable to accept that. The next item that's been discussed is Health and Human Services. Similar situation in Health and Human Services. The administration, they had a $216 million appropriation last year. They spent $192 million of it. They had $21 million not spent, and $15 million is in OB2, the amendment to remove, still leaving $6.2 million HHS did not spend last year. Then there was another $10 million that was being reduced from the 2025, but still leaves them $195 million of appropriation in the 2025 budget, plus the carry forward of $6.2 million, gives them $201 million available for this coming year, where they spent 192, they have 291, they'd have $9 million above what they spent last year. They could increase their spending 5% and still have it covered. I also wanted to mention that we did not take any reduction in behavioral health programs, public assistance programs. We did not do public health aid funding reductions. Developmental disabilities were protected, no cuts there. Biomedical research, there was a proposal, $15 million there. We did not do that. So it was only at administration that we had this $25 million reduction, and I believe that is still well within the amount they were left is well within the amount they would need.
Time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Clements. Senator Ben Hansen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. And you don't have to say Ben Hansen anymore since there's only one Hansen, so I saw you struggling with it up there. Thank you very much. I want to thank the Appropriations Committee for all the hard work they put into the special session and putting all these numbers together, and also the changes with some of the amendments that they have coming forward. And just for clarification's sake, and I know where Senator Duncan and others are coming from when it comes to their concern about where some of this money is being allocated and where it's getting taken away from. But with the new amendments, DED, behavioral health, those are some of the main ones I know we had some people had concern with. Those are now those aren't going to be touched with the new amendment. And so I know it's a relief among quite a few senators here. And I think Senator Conrad is, she's right that we don't have to address a lot of these appropriations and budget issues to stay in compliance with federal or state law. or to maintain current fiscal obligations in relation to property tax credits. But in my opinion, I think to be an efficient and effective government, anytime we have an ability to maybe address certain issues within our budget or appropriations where we can be more effective, I think that's appropriate. But so like only addressing the budget every 2 years and then forgetting about it, every 2 years and never touching it again, I don't think we're kind of doing a little bit of a disservice to the property tax payers and just Nebraska taxpayers in general. It's kind of like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. It's kind of like only like working out on Mondays and expecting to be in peak physical condition. It's something that you kind of have to address, when you have the opportunity, and do it multiple times throughout the week in order to kind of, be physically fit. And so saying, well, we're only going to do it on Mondays and forget about it the rest of the week, and then we're still going to be efficient and effective as a government. I think it's most appropriate. So I have no problem, I think, addressing a lot of these budget issues right now, and I think it's appropriate. Senator Frederickson, I think, is also right when it comes to the executive branch of government really doesn't have control. I'm pretty sure I'm right here. They don't have control about how much money they're going to get. The burden of the purse strings is upon us as a legislature. But once they do get money appropriated to them, they do have control about where it's spent. And so I think maybe that's where we have some of the issues here. And that's kind of the rub, I think, sometimes between what our job is as legislators versus what the executive branch can do with that money then once they get it. So, and one other thing I wanted to address, and I think this is some of the literature that we had handed out to us and some of the news articles, and it seems like one of the words that we hear over and over again, and the speaker mentioned it as well, is unprecedented. Unprecedented is not always bad. Unprecedented means it just wasn't done before very much. And so if we're actually taking the approach as a legislature, as a government, saying we are going to actually start looking at where taxpayer money is located in our government, these slush funds, agencies that are kind of keeping money. And now we're actually going to start looking at that and saying, we don't think it's maybe appropriate that all these agencies and committees should have money set aside to do with what they will when they want to. I don't think it's appropriate to have taxpayer money just floating out into space there for other agencies to use when they want to. We appropriate it. If you don't use it that year, you come back to us and ask for more. I always thought that was the appropriate approach of an efficient government, and also that's consent of the governed. They ask us for money. If they don't use it, they have to ask us for more again. So
1 minute.
I like the fact that we're actually delving deeper into where, because I'm chair of HHS. You want to talk about a committee that has the most amount. If anybody's ever seen an anthill or an ant farm, they got all these tunnels that go everywhere, and sometimes you don't know where the heck they even go. That's kind of what HHS is like. Senator Kavanaugh knows. She's been on the committee enough times. Sometimes there's money floating around in HHS. We don't even know what it does. And so I think it's a good thing. It might be unprecedented, but I think it's a good thing that we're actually kind of looking at where some of this money is spent and where we can be more effective and efficient and spend our taxpayers' dollars appropriately. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Vargas, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. Thank you to my colleagues that have been chiming in here about the work. I could only speak for myself. Within committee, there was probably about 80% of things that I agreed on, and my colleagues know because I made it very clear what I disagreed on within committee, and I wasn't alone in that. There was a few others that were also in that camp on different issues. The biggest thing for me that caused the most heartache is both a little bit on process on how we do things in appropriations, and also not knowing how it's going to harm services and actually harm Nebraskans, which was the DHHS 25 million base appropriation reduction. Look, the overwhelming majority of the other things are lapses or are budget reductions, and for LB3, the interest and the interest or the cash fund transfers, those are different stories, and I largely supported those. But not having enough information on the $25 million base budget appropriation was my reason for being no on this bill. Because the $25 million, we were not given information in committee or through the process on what those cuts are directly coming from. We were given information in verbal communication to our fiscal analyst on the day that we were making decisions, looking my members in the eye, because that's what happened. And then we were not given a written explanation on what all those cuts were. We were told that they were, cuts as a result of efficiencies that were identified from contracts, and cuts that were identified from, cost savings. And it was a lot of language that did not add up to transparency that we're normally used to and what we do in the budget committee. And I don't know, but everybody on the floor may or may not always agree on everything that we put out in the budget. But this is my point of disagreement with this component of what we're doing on budget adjustments, which is we usually know exactly which contracts or what services would or would not be impacted by doing this. And we are safe to assume that services will be harmed if we continue to maintain these things. And so that's my biggest heartburn with this. This is the reason why I was in NOAA committee. It's the reason why I'm not supporting it in the form it's in. I hope that there's more that can be done to address this, because next year we can come in with a full look and identify what a 1% or 2% either with growth or reduction looks like with a budget. I have made that as a suggestion in the committee several times, because there still are agencies, code and non-code, that I believe either have reappropriations or could take a small reduction in their budget that wouldn't harm services that are non-DHS related. And I think that some of these things we were able to do because of that. But we were able to do all that we normally had because we were constrained by time. And this was what was given to us as the proposal. And now this being our proposal, you can tell we said no to a lot of different items in a collective voice in the committee, not from a disagreement that there wasn't an intent, but from a disagreement on policy on each of the individual votes. And some of the things we agreed on, because we said, okay, we don't have enough of a rationale from the agency that they need to use these lapses to do their work. And because we don't have enough of a rationale, it makes sense that we can lapse those right now. And then next year they come in and have to make their claim as to what we did. It's the reason why we didn't move forward. There was no cuts on public assistance, no cuts on behavioral health aid, no cuts on biomedical research, no cuts on the DD provider services, the public health, and really trying to protect those different cuts, but also knowing every agency next year is on the clock to demonstrating to the Future Appropriations Committee why they need their reappropriations, what they intend to do with their dollars. And you heard this from some of my committee members, because if there's not a rational explanation as to why those dollars are being carried over, they will likely be targeted for cuts next year and deeper base appropriation budget reductions. And that's going to be the result of not having enough of the information brought in the case made. And I want to make sure that the public and our community and all the agencies and every single provider that receives it is aware of that, because that is going to be left up to the process again. And so the majority of this that I agree with in terms of I voted for, but I'm against it on the process of the $25 million base budget appropriation reduction for HHS.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator Dungan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, again, I rise at this point, I think, in favor of the motion to indefinitely postpone LB2. What I was talking about earlier was the findings by the federal government as they pertain to our current DD services. I'm going to ask some questions of some members of appropriations here in a second to get more to the heart of that. But the crux of the finding from DOJ was that Nebraska fails to ensure that individuals with serious mental illness know about and can access the state's covered services in the community, even though these services are more therapeutic and cost-effective than institutionalization. For Nebraskans with SMI, serious mental illness, a lack of access to community-based services, including crisis services, can trigger unnecessary admissions to hospitals or assisted living facilities. We are not adequately providing services, nor are we adequately alerting to the services that are provided, and that's leading to a crisis. We've heard a little bit about the fact that these budget cuts don't affect DD services because we specifically took out a couple of the line items as they pertain to developmental disability aid and behavioral health aid. Madam President, I was hoping Senator Vargas could yield to a few questions.
Senator Vargas, will you yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. You and I were having this conversation off the mic earlier. So I understand that the governor's proposal and the committee proposal are different in that the committee proposal did not take any money from developmental disability aid or behavioral health aid. Is it your understanding that taking the $15 million still from DHHS administration could have an impact on behavioral health or DD aid?
My biggest concern has been with the $25 million base appropriation reduction in HHS operations, and I think it could. Part of the reason is we were not told what contracts were being voided or reduced or changed or ended. And they have the prerogative as the administration to end contracts, that's true, but we also, I think, have a responsibility to know where those reductions are coming from.
Okay, and I think that's kind of my concern is that when we're talking about this cut in administration, people say, oh, don't worry, we're not touching DD, but all of these base adjustments and these cuts could potentially have that downstream effect, it sounds like, and the problem is we simply don't know. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, we don't know, and we did not have it in writing. Before we voted on this in final committee, I did ask, did we get anything in writing regards what these cuts were? And we had not gotten anything in writing at that time. We've gotten verbal, high-level response about it. I know the chair has received more, but again, it's still line items and not narrative explanations as to what these adjustments or cuts or efficiencies are. And I think that's the rub for some of us, and for me, I'm only going to speak for myself, that not having that information, not knowing what those contracts are, make it hard to say yes to something, and that's the pain point.
Well, and that's exactly, I guess, what I was getting at earlier. So I appreciate that. And then the last question I have for you kind of links us back to yesterday's conversation when we were talking about AM 84, which was the ultimate bill that passed. Is it your understanding, or what is your understanding as an appropriations member about whether or not these appropriations that we're debating here today are necessary in order to effectuate the AM 84 we passed yesterday? Do we need to do this in order to pay for that 1107 front load, or are they separate?
Well, if you look at the green sheet, there still is existing right now in the biennium about $500 million that can offset what we currently have right now in the biennium. The LB2 represents $117 million in this current fiscal year, but there's also the LB3 interest and transfers is about another $25 million. So not passing LB2 would have a $117 million delta that could be covered from the green sheet. Yeah, so that's.
Okay, thank you, Senator Vargas. I really appreciate that.
Yep.
So, colleagues, what I'm getting at here, A, is the cuts that we're making don't necessarily mean that we're not cutting services. And when we have a lack of information over what we're doing in a short session, that's problematic. And secondary, and I think even maybe more importantly, we don't even need to do this. We don't even need to do this to pay for what we did yesterday. So we need to think long and hard about whether or not we're going to effectuate a budget change here in the middle of a special session in order to do what we passed or at least advanced yesterday, and think about if this is the right way to do it. I hope we continue to have a conversation, and I'll probably punch in at least once more to go over a little bit more of the concerns the DOJ found with regards to our DD services. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senators Duncan and Vargas. Senator McKinney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Support the motion to IPP LB2. I rise again because my concern is, well, I'm concerned about what's going on with DHHS as well, but also with corrections and the 10 million that is being taken away from the operations within corrections. And if I'm reading this right, I think they're also trying to take away money from the Correctional Facility Cash Fund and correctional industries. But why that concerns me is our correctional facilities are already overcrowded, and we're going to take away $10 million from operations from an already overcrowded system. From operations. So if we take away $10 million, how is that going to affect the day-to-day operations of our corrections facilities, who are already overcrowded? Not all facilities are fully staffed. Not all are working how they're supposed to work. So what does this mean that they're taking away from operations? So Could Senator Clements answer a couple questions possibly?
Senator Clements, will you yield?
Yes.
Senator Clements, this $10 million that's being taken away from corrections operations, what does this mean practically?
In the hearing, the Director of Corrections came in and testified that he's had a number of savings, especially hiring nurses as employees rather than contract nurses that get $100 an hour and can pay them up to $60 an hour and save money, and have in-house employees. And also, we had $18 million that was not spent June 30th. It's carrying over. And of the 18 million, we took 10 million, about half of it. So there's 8 million still carrying forward, adding to an appropriation of 350. So that 358 million available where they only spent 315 last year. So we felt there was plenty of room to do that.
Have they already staffed all of those nursing positions?
It wasn't mentioned how many were done, but that was a agreement with the director told us that he had that much savings.
Also, it's to my knowledge that not all of the facilities are fully staffed currently. So if we take away, if they possibly don't already have all the nursing positions fully staffed and all the facilities aren't fully staffed, do you think taking away this $10 million could potentially have a negative impact if in the future there's a need to increase the level of compensation that is needed to attract people to these positions?
I think there is plenty of room. We didn't reduce their current year appropriation, just took part of what they had not spent last year. So they'll have $358 million available where they spent 315. So they'll have $43 million more than what they spent last year.
Okay, so whenever that new prison comes online, do you foresee them coming back and asking for this $10 million or more again?
I don't know. We're certainly going to want to fund corrections so that it operates well. So,
because I asked that because when people voted to fund the new prison, they did not vote to fund operations for the new prison. So taking away 10 million for operations means in the future, people in this body will be voting for more funding for operations, although they'll be cutting operational budgets today or sometime this week. But I appreciate you. Thank you. And that's my concern. Our prisons are overcrowded, understaffed, and we're cutting budgets from an already horribly ran system, and people's lives are going to be affected, and I hope people understand that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wayne and Senator Clements. Senator McKinney and Senator Clements. Senator Wayne, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. It's time for our Ebony Ivory show. Will Senator Clements yield to a question?
Senator Clements, will you yield?
Yes.
So the question I have is real simple. Do we need LB 2 and 3 in order to fund LB 34?
Yes, we do. We need to be able to fund the additional money. LB 34 has more money than what is currently in the property tax credit fund, $185 million. So we do need LB 2 and 3 so that we can give the property tax relief.
Thank you. So we should always end a special session with us doing our Ebony and Ivory. So no more questions for you, but I appreciate it. Thank you. So there we go. I rely on the chair on this, and it says we need LB 2 and 3. I'm not in favor of LB 34. But the reality is for those who voted for that yesterday, and I'm thinking of 3 individuals, just being blunt and honest about it, you have to make cuts over here. period. Where's the delta? We got to fund the delta. So no matter how we dance it up and try to make it sound good, you voted for property tax relief on the backs of those individuals who rely on HHS, our correctional institution, and other institutions. That's okay, but I want people to clearly understand that. Clearly understand that. And with that, I'll yield the remainder of my time to Senator Duncan.
Senator Duncan, you are yielded 3 minutes, 14 seconds.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Senator Wayne. I always appreciate the surprise time, but this does give me an opportunity to continue talking about what I was discussing earlier, which is, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but there's a lot contained in here, which is the Department of Justice's findings that we as a state are inadequately providing for behavioral health services and DD services. In between the last time that I was on the mic and just now, I was out in the rotunda, and I was talking to individuals who are experts in this field, who are boots on the ground working in DD services. What they highlighted for me is at this juncture, it's not just the policy level issues that we're dealing with when it comes to DD. It's not just the decisions that are being made by the department heads that are problematic or not problematic, or the governor or the legislature. It's the actual administration, meaning it's the day-to-day operations in DD services that are becoming incredibly difficult to maintain at an appropriate level. Already, we're not maintaining them at a level we should be. We currently are not providing our legal requirements in terms of access to community-based services. Under the Olmstead decision by the Supreme Court, we have an obligation to provide DD services or behavioral health services in the most integrated setting possible, meaning if you are capable of operating in the community and if you want a job or continue to work on community building services, we as a state must provide that to you. And we must ensure that you have actual access to those services. But what we find more often than not is members in the DD community don't have either knowledge of the services that are available to them when it comes to job preparation or community involvement or things they can do at home, and instead are funneled into assisted living facilities. One of the individuals who they interviewed during this entire, again, years-long process, they say in this letter, one person who's been institutionalized at an assisted living facility in a day program for more than a decade described what leaving would mean to her. She called it freedom. I don't mean to be overly dramatic, but again, these are individuals who often get left behind, who we don't think about. Now, day facilities and day programming can be fantastic.
1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. They can be fantastic. I know friends of mine who go to those day programs, and it's fantastic work. They do job training and things like that. There's people who work in those day programmings that are fantastic people. But we need to ensure that we are giving the appropriate level of care to people who need it, and that we are providing access to a continuum of care. So if you do have crisis management services where you have to go stay in an assisted living facility for a period of time, that you are able to eventually go back and live in the community. We need to trust that folks in the DD and behavioral health community can live in the community and thrive in the community. And we need to do our best to make sure we're doing that. So I think this is the perfect opportunity to have this conversation when we're discussing cutting tens of millions of dollars out of the administrative budget for the Department of Health and Human Services at the exact same time that we are seeing administrative and operational problems in the DD world. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne and Duncan. Senator Erdman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. It was a great time to be in the queue. I will have to respectfully disagree with my friend, the fish whisperer, Senator Wayne, about we're balancing or taking property tax relief from services that people need. I want to go over these numbers with you. And I know what I'm trying to do here is not going to work, because I'm going to try to use facts to change your opinion. And you see, you have formed your opinion with your own set of facts, and so it won't make any difference what facts I present, so it won't change your mind. But I'm going to give it a shot, okay? They talked about administrative services and DHHS taking a hit. Let's talk about that, all right? Administrative services last year, their appropriation was $216 million. They spent $192 million. So the carryover was 21.2 million. We lapsed 15 million, which leaves them 6.2 million going forward, added to their base appropriation next year at 195, gives them 201 million, and they spent not 192. Now, the others that they've been whining about is we're taking away services, and I use the word whining intentionally. Behavioral health aid, we took zero. We lapsed no money, zero from behavioral health. Public assistance, we lapsed zero, none from public assistance. Disability aid, we lapsed zero from that, all right? So those three categories have nearly 50 million in excess that we left in place. 50 million. That's quite a bit. That's not anywhere close to zero. So for having these people stand up and say that we're taking away funding from those who need it the most is not a true statement. But that's not what we do here, because it's all about semantics. It's all about trying to get you to understand how bad this really is. We left all of that money, all right? Behavioral aid, we're going to lapse over 17 million that are going to carry over, and they have a $70 million budget. That's 87 million, and they spent 59. Think about that. 87 and 59. It's pretty good. And then the next one, the public assistance, they spent 61 million, and we're allowing them to carry forward 88 million. So which is greater, 88 or 51? You don't even have to be a lawyer to figure that one out. And then the next one, disability aid, they're carrying over 21 million. Their base budget is 197. So we're talking about 225 million. They spent 183. Wow, it looks like they got a lot of money. I'm surprised that someone hasn't thought about that before they start talking about how we're taking money away from services. It's not true. So I recommend that somebody in the queue call the question and we vote on LB2, because not one person in this body is going to change their mind. So I already know what the vote's going to be. We already settled that a long time ago before we got here. So to save a lot of time and aggravation and people spreading misinformation the rest of the day, let's just vote on LB2 and move on to LB3. That would make a lot of sense to me. So when you get up there and talk about these cuts that we're taking away people's necessities, it's not a true statement.
1 minute.
And if you want to see this, I can show it to you. But that's exactly the decisions we made in the Appropriations Committee, was to keep those services in place so that we didn't have this problem that they think we have, and we don't have that. Same with corrections and all of these other things that they think we're taking their money that's going to stop their operations is all smoke and mirrors. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, colleagues. I stand in support of motion 10 to indefinitely postpone LB2. I don't think I can get through even a sliver of what I have to say about LB2 in the 5 minutes. I have some questions as well for members of the Appropriations Committee about LB2 and some of the decisions being made. Would Senator Clements yield to a question?
Senator Clements, will you yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Clements. You were speaking on the microphone just briefly ago with Senator McKinney about the corrections $10 million, correct?
Yes.
And you said that the savings were going to be realized by hiring nursing staff.
That's what I understood from the hearing.
Because they currently are using traveling nurses.
Yes.
Which is more expensive.
Correct.
Did they tell you why they're using traveling nurses?
Well, it was hard to hire nurses in-house, but they're finding it. They are finding.
But they haven't hired the nurses that they need to replace the traveling nurses. So isn't it premature to cut the budget for the traveling nurses?
they've already hired some of them. They're talking about some, he mentioned that some already have been hired. Do they prefer being a state employee with the benefits they get as compared to being a consultant?
It's a better deal for everybody to have a steady job and have the nurses be consistent and be state employees, absolutely. My question, however, is they have had a very difficult time staffing permanent nursing positions, which is why they have had to use the traveling nursing. And my question to you is, are they able to staff state nurses to the point where we no longer need traveling nurses? Because if we're going to take $10 million away from them, they're not going to be able to hire traveling nurses. And we already have a healthcare crisis within corrections. So I want to make sure that we aren't just taking away $10 million that we haven't already backstopped by hiring the people that need to be hired.
They had $18 million unspent June 30th of this year. And we're taking 10 million of the 18 and
That's not
leaving 8 million
my
more.
question,
So
Senator Clements. My question is, have they hired the nurses that warrant this cut to offset?
I don't know if they've hired all of those.
Do you know how many they need to hire?
And I think there's efficiencies that they're finding as well.
What are the efficiencies?
That was the only description I received in the hearing.
Okay. The only description you heard in the hearing for 10 million cut is efficiencies, and you didn't ask what the efficiencies were?
The director said he was very comfortable with the budget, removing $10 million.
The director of corrections?
Yes.
Who works at the pleasure of the governor, because it's a code agency. So his boss told him that he was going to be okay with a $10 million cut, as we all saw in the email that I shared with you at the hearing and yesterday, that Lee Will told every director head that they would cut their budget by X amount, including corrections was told in an email to cut their budget, not specific to the nursing program, by $10 million. And now they're associating that $10 million to the nursing program, and you didn't ask how they discovered efficiencies? But we still need to pass this? Thank you, Senator Clements.
1 minute.
Colleagues, I want to hear from every member of the Revenue Committee. Senator Armendariz said to ask questions. Epiphany explained. They did not. I was in there. They did not explain. We're not going to cut child welfare. We're going to cut $25 million from administrative costs. What are the efficiencies that you have suddenly realized? I'm not denying that there's bloat in government, but just obtuse language like efficiencies is not getting to the heart of anything. And they did this. The governor did this. The administration did this. His budget office did this. Wow. We were working on the biennium budget when we passed the biennium budget. And frankly, I think it is galling that members of the Appropriations Committee didn't know that that was happening.
Senator.
Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Nice to see everybody today. I apologize for being a little late. Today was my youngest's first day of kindergarten, so I walked him to school with all of the other kids and my wife. So OPS, kindergarten starts on Wednesday, the rest of the school starts on Thursday, and so we all walked him up together, even though the other kids didn't start today. And so as a result of this special session, I missed my son Jack's birthday because my family was on vacation, which is our annual family vacation that happens to coincide with his birthday and my dad's birthday. And so I missed that to be here with you all. And so I said, well, I don't want to miss walking my youngest to his first day of kindergarten. So I was a little late, so I've missed some of the debate, but I appreciate the conversation and the minutia. Also, I did tell my oldest, she asked if we tell jokes here. And I said, well, we say things that are interpreted as funny to adults sometimes. And so she asked me to tell a joke. So why can you never trust atoms? Because they make up everything. So that was the joke she asked me to tell. So now I can tell her that I did that, and I assume she's not watching. But I've been listening to the debate so far. I think there's seems like disagreements about whether this bill is necessary. This bill and the other bill, LB3, that's trailing it, is necessary to make the bill that we ran through yesterday work, make the numbers pencil out. And, again, we all keep talking about how a special session is different. There's shorter timelines. The notice of hearing is not 7 days. It's reasonable with publication in the journal and reasonable notice so that folks actually have an opportunity to know that a hearing is happening. I know that there are some people who maybe don't fully understand that publication in the journal is an actual thing, that once published in the journal, people would be able to look at that and see that there's a hearing even the next day, 24 hours, less than 24 hours notice, but it would still be published. That is a requirement of the rules. But it is purposely a shorter time frame. But at the moment, I'm opposed to LB2 because I don't know if it's been articulated a justification for it. And it does sound like that it's possibly unnecessary. But my question, I apologize, Senator Clements. I know you're busy, but if Senator Clements would yield to a question, I have one that came to me while I was standing here.
Senator Clements, will you yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Clements. And I, again, apologize. Like I said, I wasn't here, so I missed part of this. So my understanding is that these costs that are being cut are ones that you're saying are lapsing funds?
There are two categories.
Okay.
There's the lapse means what they had not spent of their budget on June 30th of this year is unspent dollars. So we lapse some of what they had not spent. Then there is budget reductions for this 2025 fiscal year that is also part of the reduction.
Okay, I appreciate that. So my question is, do similar fiscal situations come up every year?
Yes, there are, at the end of a fiscal year, there's a decision whether to reappropriate, let them carry it forward, or to lapse some of the dollars.
1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. And when is that decision usually made, and by whom?
Well, yeah, I haven't had it done in the summertime interim session. It's usually like next budget year, next January is more common when we start working on the budget.
Okay, so this is not an unusual situation that there may be funds that are going unspent and that they would be lapsed, but that's normally done in a regular session.
Yes, and almost all of these agencies, their money will lapse next June 30th if it hasn't been spent.
Okay.
But we're just doing it earlier.
And we will take this up during the next biennium either way.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you, Senator Clements. I'm still trying to wrap my head around exactly what we're doing here, I guess. So I'm going to take a look at the handout that Senator Clements gave us, and maybe I'll punch my light again if I have other questions. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator Clements.
Thank you, Senator John Kavanaugh. Senator Armendariz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Will Senator Clements yield to a question?
Senator Clements, will you yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Clements. So in appropriations, we did have the Director of Corrections come in and explain that this $10 million that had not been used was okay. No services would be affected. Would you like to expound more on that discussion for us?
Yes. After I was asked that question, I thought about more of what was said in the hearing. Besides hiring nurses in-house, the Corrections Department is registering inmates for Medicaid, which in the past we've spent 100% of state money on health care for inmates. The ones who are Medicaid eligible now will have help from the federal dollars spending to help with medical treatments. And also the director said that they're ordering food in bulk, where each facility was ordering their own separately. Now they're ordering it in bulk and have a savings that way. So those were a couple other items that he had mentioned that I had thought about after Senator Kavanaugh was talking to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Clements, for clarifying that for us. Also, was brought up that government is not a business. You may agree with that. You may disagree with that. Regardless, in appropriations, it is a function, a business function that we do there. Anytime there are funds, which are taxpayer funds, money, exchanged for services, which we do as government, there are business principles that are applied. We do that in appropriations. We use budgets, we use financial modeling, we use financial analysts, all business-related functions, to be fair. I do believe that it should be applied. Otherwise, what principles would you use with the taxpayers' money? Throw it in a bucket, see what's needed? We definitely use business principles in government. I do find it interesting, as soon as we hire an outside agency to come in and see if we are running efficiently, and they present us with definitely areas that we can improve, even provide better services quicker and more efficiently. The minute there's a savings found, nobody wants to give that back to the taxpayer. That is exactly what the audit is supposed to do for our taxpayers, is to come into our state government, determine where we could do better, and improve the value of those taxpayer dollars. If we're going to go and fight every single dollar they find or efficiency they find, that's irresponsible of us 49 members here. It is our job to every year go through that budget and find out what is not being used. If it's not being used, what else could we be using it for the state of Nebraska, for the people of Nebraska? It's irresponsible to say that agency might not be using it. We can't make them use it if they're not using it. Why would we let it sit there? Why would we not put it to something, thank you, Madam President, to something more important to the people of Nebraska? What those people are saying right now is they want property tax relief. There are lots of dollars being unused that we could apply to property tax relief. That is what we're called here to do today and for the last several days. Appropriations spent several days and questioned every single agency that came to us, and we got detail on whether that agency could be sustained. All services would be sustained. We didn't even move all of their dollars they're not using. They still have unused dollars in every single agency. This is responsible government. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Armendariz. Senator Lippincott, you're recognized.
Thank you. As we just heard a few moments ago, here it is, it's August, and all these different agencies and government, state government, I'm sure this is true for the federal government as well, they come up with their budgets. They have to plan ahead. So right now, all these different governmental agencies here in the state are getting their numbers together, and they are determining what kind of budget they will have for the next year. What they do is they supply it to our people in the Legislative Fiscal Office. Now, the governor also has his own fiscal office. So these state budgets do go through several fine-tooth looks in terms of ensuring that their budgets are not out of whack. And if their budgets are somewhat out of kilter, the folks in the Legislative Fiscal Office will ask for additional explanations. So they will come to our committee hearings, and they do have the fine points as to what each agency has. So let's just take it, for instance, a state agency will have a budget of about $10 million. Well, we operate in a biennium, 2 years. The year begins in an odd year, so coming up in 2025, they'll start with a new biennium. So let's just say an agency has a $10 million budget. So in an ideal world, they'll spend $5 million the first year, $5 million in the second year of that biennium. But obviously, they're not going to run the numbers all the way down to zero. So what they will do is they will have some reserve buildup. I would like to ask Senator Dorn a question, and that's called a baseline. And in this, well, first off, may I ask him a question?
Senator Dorn, would you yield?
Yes. So in this fictitious situation we have, a budget or a federal agency will have a budget of $10 million, $5 million for each year, but they'll establish a base amount that they want to make sure that they have in reserve. Let's just say it's $1 million. Explain to me. Okay, go ahead and explain.
That base would be the 5 million each of those years. That would be the base amount or whatever that we, the Appropriations Committee and the legislature have agreed that, yes, that is their funding for each of those 2 fiscal years. 5 million is their base then.
Okay. But again, they can run their numbers down to a certain number and they want to have a cash reserve. And in essence, those cash reserves aren't always, sometimes there'll be an excess above the cash reserve. And that's what we've tried to do. We've tried to skim off monies that have not been used. A few moments ago, Senator McKinney asked about corrections. And corrections, they had, I could look these numbers up, but just for ease of conversation here, $18 million over. And so what we did is we pulled $10 million out, leaving them $8 million. So there's an excess there. Is that correct?
That is somebody like that, the corrections, they have much bigger budget than the 5 million. So if they have a 200 million, yes, they want to have some funds left at the end of the year. That's the way they normally operate. But we get the data, particularly from, I call it our fiscal staff. We have, and a lot of them are here today. They're under both of the balconies or whatever. They give us the data, the information of where those funds are at, how much is there. But if we see, particularly some of these agencies that we see 200 million and they have 5 million left 5 years ago and now they're up to 15 million, why do they need, the question is, why do they need 15 million to operate when they have that in excess? Should we be at that same base we were at before? And all those questions we have in appropriations.
Correct. And so those numbers, sometimes they will fluctuate regarding the fiscal office and the agencies, and they try to operate as lean as possible. But sometimes in all agencies, just like in business, sometimes you'll have additional cash money, and that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to make things as lean as possible.
Yes.
So sometimes people misunderstand it and think it's a cut, and it's not really a cut.
Yes.
Thank you.
Time, senators. Thank you, Senator Lippincott and Dorn. Senator Vargas, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate Senator Lippincott asking that question of Senator Dorn. A couple of items I wanted to make sure that we talked about. One is about a base budget appropriation, and one of the reasons why I'm in opposition to the base budget appropriation for the $25 million for Health and Human Services operations. The reason why is not an opposition to generally identifying budgets and reducing them. Again, my colleagues and I, we've worked on, they've seen me do this. I have voted for reducing budgets of different agencies in the past because they didn't bring enough of a good rationale on why they need the money. They were underspending the money, and so this was a way to rebase them. It happens very consistently. And this is the reason why I supported a lot of other things in the recommendations, honestly. But my hard line for me, which is different than Senator, let's say, Lippincott and a few others in committee, is that I was not given a cogent rationale as to why we need to cut $25 million base appropriations from the HHS operations, which represented about a 10% reduction in that line item in that budget. And when we talk about making 2-3% cuts to try to make government more lean, I'm in support of that. Because that's one of the conversations we've had on how to actually provide long-term relief and reduce our spending. It is what we've done in the committee for years. The issue I have is doing a 10-11% cut and not knowing what that impacts and not having transparency on that. And that's an issue. It's a precedent that we shouldn't set. That's a problem that I am pushing towards the Future Appropriations Committee. I'm also pushing toward it. It is not completely in opposition to what Senator Lippincott said. Many times, agencies will underspend, and when they underspend, we will reduce their appropriations at times, because why should they be carrying over more money if they're not fully spending it? At the same time, sometimes we give them back that appropriation because they're being fiscally responsible and they're saving their resources because they don't want to spend everything that they're budgeted, and that's also fiscally responsible. And so I don't think a standard should just be, we take reappropriations whenever they get it. And what I think is a good thing to know is most of these reappropriation lapses aren't taking all of the reappropriations lapses that they have available. It's taking some of them for a lot of agencies. And so the conversations we always had with fiscal office was, do they have enough to maintain this, what they're going to do with their lapses? And the answer was almost overwhelmingly yes. And the where's, when there was a but, really lived in, we don't have enough information on things, and that's where HHS came in. And that is my pain point there, because we shouldn't set a standard that we cut a base budget appropriation, not by 1, 2, 3%, by 11%, without having the information on actually what that harms. And that's the issue, right? Like that's something that we shouldn't be doing in the future here, and we shouldn't be doing here today. Now, addressing that would alleviate a lot, I think, some people's concerns. It would alleviate my concern. I still have pain points with how we use our reappropriations in Legislative Council still as well. Luckily, we didn't do a base budget adjustment, which I think was responsible. But it is a good thing when agencies get allocated 100% of money and then they spend 90% of it, because it tells us they're not just going to spend everything we budget to them. If they get into a habit of spending everything we budget to them just because they're afraid of being cut, that's a bad habit. That's an incredibly bad habit that I don't want to set. That's why I've been transparent, telling every agency and every sub entity or contract designee that if you're doing services right now and you're not following through on what you're going to do, you're probably going to be targeted next year. Or you have to make claim as to why you need those reappropriation adjustments and say, hey, we're looking to have a 10% reserve so that we don't be over-reliant on the general fund. I think that's okay to state. And I really hope my colleagues in the committee change a little bit on this, that it's okay for agencies to carry over 5, 10%, 15%. When it gets beyond that, which is some of the instances of why we cut things here, then it's like, well, if you're not spending that much, which I made claim also even for the governor's office, there's 40% lapses in the governor's office right now. We could take more. There just wasn't an appetite to do that. And maybe that'll happen next year. But it's our responsibility to keep looking at these things. But I don't want to harm that service within DHHS, because I don't know what it is and isn't doing.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator Duncan, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, whenever we talk about the budget, it's interesting because I turn to the green sheet and I start to get into a little bit of a rabbit hole here as to the numbers. And we hear a lot about the green sheet. For those who are watching at home, it's literally a green sheet that we have handed out to us with budget numbers that go into our biennial budget here in 23, 24, 24, 25, and then estimates in the out years to 25, 26, all the way to 26, 27. I have stated since my first year here that one of my major concerns is the overall fiscal health for the state of Nebraska. And in my first year that I was here, this body passed significant income and corporate tax cuts that get implemented in sort of a stair-step fashion over a period of time. And what I've always sort of been concerned about is just taking a step back, not even needing to be a financial expert. If you reduce the amount of money that you're taking in, but simultaneously try to continue to spend at the same level, over a period of time, your savings account goes down. I know that personally from my own savings account, which continues to go down because of the great salary that we make here as a legislature at $12,000 a year, but that's neither here nor there. And so when I look at the green sheet, what I tend to look at is the estimate for the following biennium. And I try to see, is the fiscal health of our state going up or is it going down? And what's interesting is you look at this green sheet and it's biennial budget, the actual end here, the ending balance was $1.8 billion for 22-23, stays at about $1.8 billion for 23-24, drops to about $855 million for 24-25, drops to $680 million for 25-26, and then by 26-27, goes down to $272 million. The next line on the green sheet tells us what we then put into our minimum reserve, which is essentially our savings account. There's a certain amount we have to set aside that we're not allowed to budget because we want to make sure we have that in our savings, which is an important thing. And for my colleagues who were here before me who have seen times of economic disparity and downturn, you know that our cash reserves are important. So according to this green sheet then, by 26-27, we estimate ending with about $270 million ending balance. Set aside 3% minimum reserve, which is $335 million-ish, I'm rounding, and you're left with $63 million in the hole, which we are not allowed to be. So the reason I highlight that is I have great concern for the fiscal health of the state of Nebraska. And I understand that there's a lot of different elements that go into this. And again, you could sit down and have discussions with the Appropriations Committee or the Revenue Committee about the intricacies of these numbers. But the numbers on the paper show us that moving forward into 26-27, we're going to have a problem. I was wondering if Senator Dorn would yield to some questions.
Senator Dorn, will you yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Dorn. I'm asking you this because last year on the mic, I think you made some comments about this that I thought were helpful to explain it. You're on the Appropriations Committee, is that correct?
Yes.
And we, in the last session, did a bunch of what is commonly called cash sweeps. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the cash sweeps at that point in time, some had argued were for property tax. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. And then at the end of the day, though, I think there were some comments made and you explained that the cash sweeps that we were doing last year were actually to sort of offset this potential negative financial impact that we would see in the future. Can you speak a little bit more about that and sort of the effect of the cash sweeps and if we don't do them and how it leads to the potential out-year outlook?
Want to clarify one other thing, though. You talked about out there, 267 million. We'd have. I wanted to clarify some things first. A minimum reserve that says 3% on here.
1 minute.
When you visit with Keisha, that's a calculated number about 10 or 11 things. This on this page that you were talking about, though, that's basically our checking account. That isn't. Yes, we have those funds in our checking account. Our cash reserve, and that is on this screen sheet, you have to turn it over. That's our cash reserve or our cash on hand, which we use for one-time spending. So that's what we keep in reserve to pull forward like we're proposing now to do for some things or whatever. So no, you are correct. These also, though, and I talked about it yesterday, the day before, they have plugged in numbers out there in the 2 years out of 4% revenue growth. We've historically been at 4.8, and they also have a calculated spending amount that we're going to appropriate in there. And I don't remember, probably Senator Clemens does, whether it's 1.5% or 2%. So that's how these numbers come about, is all of those. But we are by statute required to maintain that minimum reserve.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Dorn, and thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senators Dorn and Duncan. Senator Wayne, you're recognized. Senator Wayne, and this is your final opportunity. Senator Conrad, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Madam President. And again, good morning, colleagues. Appreciate the good dialogue that we've had in regards to this matter this morning, and definitely have appreciated the constructive and productive conversations we've been having with each other off the mic, and the good faith negotiations that we've been working on with the executive branch and other stakeholders as well, as we try and find perhaps a smooth landing to end on a high note in this extraordinary session of the Nebraska Legislature together in maybe our remaining days. But I think there's a couple of additional points that I did want to inject into the record, and I'm albeit a little rusty from my time on Appropriations Committee many years ago, but I did have the opportunity to serve in that role during my first 8 years in the legislature. And there are a couple pieces that I do want to lift up in terms of kind of providing context for reappropriated balances. And one of the things, and Senator Vargas and Senator Dorn and others have, I believe, already talked to this, but we want to ensure that we don't create a culture where we force people to spend unnecessarily. And instead of grabbing money that's unspent, we, reward a more prudent approach to utilizing appropriated funds. So that's one kind of contextual piece that I do want to think about generally. Another piece in terms of the reappropriations and some of the cash funds that pop out there is it doesn't happen all that often, but I think it's maybe every 10 years or so, we find ourselves in the situation where instead of having our annual budget, which is based on a 26 biweekly pay periods, just how the calendar works out, we end up having a 27 pay period cycle. And that is kind of an extra extraordinary cost that many times is taken care of through reappropriations and unexpended balances. And that's why at times they are perhaps higher or in flux as agencies anticipate that economic reality into the future. So that's something that I just want to make sure that we're thinking about, that we don't rush in too quickly if that would in any way prevent future agencies or appropriators from being able to meet the economic reality of an extra pay period in those years when it pops up. And then also just thinking about how some of those reappropriations perhaps have been utilized in the past as well for unforeseen circumstances that maybe don't fit squarely within other aspects of the budget, but they do provide agencies, particularly when we're working on a biennial budget as a citizen legislature with only 60 days and 90-day sessions, it does provide a requisite amount of flexibility for agencies to meet unforeseen circumstances and to be able to expend dollars appropriately that maybe weren't contemplated in the specific appropriation or the general fund. So the reason that some of these balances, thank you, Madam President, may be higher or presently unexpended are not necessarily an indication that there's a slush fund or that something nefarious or wasteful is happening in regards to those balances. And sometimes it's good to take the sweep. And that's part of a dynamic collaboration and conversation with the agency, with the executive, and with the Appropriations Committee to say, oh, actually, we can live with this because of X, Y, and Z. But I just want to make sure that extra pay period component is taken into account. And I want to make sure that we're thoughtful in terms of not setting the wrong culture for spending, and that we have flexibility for unanticipated circumstances outside of the regular budgetary process before we just move too quickly with those sweeps and grabs and on the reappropriations. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Clements, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I wanted to just review some other items that the committee went through, and I've got 6 pages of single-spaced lines here. We had a lot to consider, more than what's just been discussed yet. For example, the Secretary of State, there was a request to reduce some of his election operations, and I did call the Secretary of State, and there were 2 items that were proposed to be reduced. He said there's one of them regarding elections. He needed the full funding there, but another operation items, he had enough carry forward money. He had 691,000 carrying forward after we took 250,000. I talked to the Attorney General also. There was one item that he wanted to protect, and another item that we passed on. In the Department of Agriculture, we heard a lot of feedback about the corn checkoff fund. There was a proposal for $300,000 removal there. We did not take anything away from the corn checkoff funds. I just wanted to make people aware of that was not going, that's not part of LB2. And then also there was noxious weeds called riparian vegetation funding of $706,000 that was not removed, that was left in the budget. So those are a couple of items that we had opposition from, and we did listen, and we excluded those from any cuts. Then regarding Health and Human Services, the $25 million being discussed, Senator Jacobson had a bill last year for the hospital assessment. In that bill, it allows the state to use $15 million for administrating that program. And so 15 million of the 25 million can be covered, is allowable to be used for administration. And so more than half of the 25 million would be covered if they're from being able to use that. Department of Veterans Affairs, there was a proposed $1.3 million lapse. We didn't hear from the Department of Veterans Affairs, but the committee wanted to protect them. They've got some facilities that need more staffing, and we left money in that, hoping that they can get staffed up better. Just going through my notes here. There was a part of State Patrol operations that had a $1 million lapse. We didn't do that one in that particular line. They have 65 vacancies in State Patrol, and we're encouraging them to staff up more, and so they didn't want to cut them back to where they couldn't hire state patrolmen. Fine. The last one was the Foster Care Review Office. Was a proposed $250,000 reduction in unspent dollars from 2024.
1 minute.
But we did not take that reduction, and we also did not reduce their 2025 appropriations, so their funding is untouched for Foster Care Review Office. And so those were just a few things that haven't been discussed. I wanted to just review for those people who may have wondered about some of the things that have been brought up during the session. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm glad that Senator Clements brought up the hospital assessment from LB 1087 last year, where the governor initially wanted, I don't even remember what the obscene amount of money was from that, but we settled on, I believe it was $17.5 million to go to DHHS for an administrative fee. And now DHHS is saying, oh, we don't need 17.5 million. We can give you 15 to take off from this 25. Guess what this money is supposed to be for? Colleagues, your community's healthcare. We made a bargain with the governor to get the money in the first place. And now they're saying they never needed that extra 15 million that they had to suck out of us. And they can just shift that instead of giving it to your communities. So I guess all of your rural communities are no longer healthcare deserts. That's great to hear. I'm so thrilled to hear that. I mean, I know that Senator Jacobson's district had a nursing home closed down. I know that because my aunt was one of the doctors at that nursing home, and they sure could have used even probably $500,000. But we have solved the rural healthcare desert. So let's take that $15 million to offset the $25 million cut to DHHS that no one from the Appropriations Committee has stood up and said why we are cutting it. Efficiency is a word. It is not an answer. It does not tell the people who work at DHHS what's being cut. It doesn't tell the people in this body what is being cut. It doesn't explain anything at all about what is happening at DHHS. And Senator Hansen is right. DHHS is just like you go in and you know you're probably never going to come out. You don't know up from down in there. It is complex and messy on a good day. But you do ask questions when somebody cuts $25 million from one of the largest agencies, definitely the largest service agency, also an agency that has statutory requirements of services to be provided, case management ratios, call times, on and on and on. How does this impact federal matching funds? What are these cuts that they are making? I can tell you some of the things because I asked questions. That's how you get answers, is you ask questions and then you find answers to them. It's amazing what you can do if you just ask. So let's start with DHHS and how they are finding efficiencies. Well, they're canceling contracts. They're canceling training contracts and bringing them in-house. Contracts that they've had for over 30 years. That 50% of that contract is paid by 4E funding, and they cannot claim that 4E funding if they bring it in-house because they have to contract with a university to get that money to train their workforce in child welfare. But we've already been down this rabbit hole where we cut funding by 40%, and now we're going to do it apparently by 50% for training models. And we've seen the results. Literally, children die. Ask questions. When these agencies come in front of you, ask questions, and the answer of efficiency is not an answer. Why is that contract being brought in-house? How is that going to work? What are the metrics? What is the plan? Show me a plan of how on January 1, 2025, you are going to take over in-house the Eastern Service Area training of child welfare that has been outsourced for 30 years with a partner that is also a government entity and subject to oversight. How are you going to do that when you don't have the staff that's trained and skilled to do the training? Ask questions. I am always overwhelmingly stunned at the lack of acquisitiveness of this body and the Appropriations Committee when it comes to money. Senator Clements also brought up the noxious weed. Great that you brought that up, because the noxious weed program, they told agriculture to just cut their budget by $750K. They didn't care where it came from. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh. Senator Dover, you're recognized.
I just want to, I guess, repeat somewhat of what Chairman Clements said, but basically, with Senator Armendariz' priority bill, LB 1087, the Hospital Quality Assurance and Assessment Act, provided DHHS with, and I talked to Senator Armendariz, she thought it was around $34 million. Of that amount of money, 15 million, as Chairman Clements said, 15 million can be used discretionary. So we're not cutting. First of all, let's get on the table. We're not cutting 25 million because we replaced it with 15 million. So we're talking about 10 million. And I'll be quite truthful. That may seem like a lot of money, but when you're talking about DHHS, which is the largest agency that we have when it comes, it isn't. You have to look at things probably in proportion. Another thing I'll say is, as Senator Kavanaugh was concerned about, we've been doing something for 30 years. Well, for what it's worth, if we do something for 30 years, that doesn't justify really the act that we do it for 31 years. And I'll say one thing, as I think, as Senator Armendariz has stated, the job is to question things. Is there efficiencies? Can things be done better? And I do think they're trying to do things better in the agency and question if we've been doing these things the same way. Is it worth it? Another thing that I believe they came across was there was contracts that were just being automatically extended. And then luckily, due to the fact that we come in 30 days and 60 days, I don't think that we really have the adequate time as state senators to do a job as if we weren't here full time. And trust me, I don't want to be here full time. But it's very difficult to do things. So what happens is we come here and we find out perhaps, oh, we got this problem here. We've got this problem here. Let's address it. So unluckily, we focus on this little problem, which is part of a process. It's one little stage in manufacturing a service or a product, whatever it may be, and we fix it. Okay, and we go home. We think, oh, we fixed this. So you could say where maybe providing a service, there was where you're actually handling the documentation to administer someone into the program or something. And so we don't have the adequate people here to staff this. So then you staff that and you put a Band-Aid there. And then what happens is they're processing a lot more people, but the problem is the next link in the chain or whatever can't handle the increase. So you have a bottleneck. So then you create stress, frustration, et cetera, for the people that are doing their best. And trust me, the staff here in the Capitol is doing their best to provide whatever service or whatever product that they're providing. And so I really believe, I met with Kristen Cox of Epiphany, very intelligent lady, and people can throw stones at her all they want. I suggest you sit down with her, talk with her, and those kind of things. I think you'll find out and respect the woman. Will we all agree on what's being done? I know, because trust me, every senator here has a baby, and we have to feed the baby. And luckily, the way we feed the baby is we give it money. And the question is how much money of the taxpayer dollars are we willing to take from them? And I'll still say, when we're looking at these things, we didn't just take the government recommendations. And I'll tell you one thing: I complimented Chairman Clements just this morning that he did not go off the recommendation. We asked questions. We disagreed. We disagreed with the riparian money that was spent to keep the river open. We disagreed with the fire marshal going to a fee structure. We disagreed a lot, but you're not going to hear all the things that we disagreed with. You're just going to hear the things where we believe we did due diligence on the lapses and the cuts with questions, talking to the staff, and did our job. And so I don't know if any cut to DHHS would be acceptable to some senators, and I'm not saying that's good or bad or whatever. I'm just simply saying I just don't think that any tweaking or whatever would probably be acceptable. But there was contracts being automatically deal. And what happens, another thing we ran into was senators would come down. We said, we need the statistics. So then they would hire some firm to give these statistics that nobody looked at, and we were just automatically renewing all these contracts. So I will give the governor. I want to thank him. I believe that there's no, what I've been told, there's no contracts on automatic renewal anyway. And then we're looking at what the benefits are, and can we do it in-house or do it out-of-house? And is in-house, out-of-house, which is the best? It really depends on the situation and what they're providing. So I do believe that the governor, through Epiphany, is doing a lot of good work. We can disagree on this or that, or cuts and lapses, et cetera. But I think the Appropriations Committee did the best job they could. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dover. Senator McDonald, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Again, good morning, colleagues. Thank you, John Kavanaugh, for telling a joke earlier. I appreciate that. Tell your daughter we needed that. Let's kind of recap a little bit about appropriations and what we do and how this process goes. And so you have 80 different agencies out there, and right now you have the directors, and they come in, and there's got to be a level of trust with those directors, telling us what they need, what they don't need, what they're working on, how this is going to affect them. And again, as you know this, we just did this in last session. You're going to be doing this in 5 months. You're going to be starting over, and the governor's going to propose a budget, and we're going to depose, or you guys, whoever's on the appropriations committee, those people will then depose whatever the governor sends. And then again, this process comes to the floor. So I enjoy this part of the process, but also I think some people that have never served on appropriations, you have to understand that there is 80 agencies. We're talking about $5.4 billion budget. We're talking about, in this process today, the 21 of those agencies and the testimony that came in and we received. Now, when I got here in 17, I felt, and maybe it was impractical, we should have zero-based budgeting. We should have performance-based budgeting. Every year we should start from zero, have them justify every dollar. Now, that's not realistic when you're looking at 80 different agencies, $5.4 billion. But sometimes I think we get caught up with, oh, well, that's agency 72's money. That's agency 42's money. No, it's not. It's the taxpayers' money. Every dollar of it is the taxpayers' money. So if you and people that are elected in the future decide through the budget, and the current governor, again, he starts the budget process, decides that we're going to prioritize agency 4 versus another agency, that's part of the process. Now, when I say there's got to be trust, I believe with those directors, that trust sometimes also has to be earned through the process and the relationship and getting the information we need as the Appropriations Committee, but also for all of you. At this time, I know it's condensed. I know we spent the last few weeks since we got here on June 25th as appropriations meeting, but also I want to make sure that you know we are, as appropriations, trying to get you the best information we have. If we don't have it, and we can't answer that question, and I think Senator Clements has done a great job. I believe fiscal always does a good job. I've been here for 8 years with the fiscal office. There's been some changes. A lot of people that worked in fiscal that I miss, but they were replaced by good people, and they are getting more experience like all of us. So yeah, rely on us as the Appropriations Committee. Rely on the fiscal office and those people that work on this every day. And again, if a director, reach out to those directors, and I encourage you for next year. And also, please, we'll try to get you any information here this afternoon after lunch, which I think everyone needs a break. But please continue to ask your questions. We brought something forward as the Appropriations Committee that we felt after going through those hearings with the directors and others and the public, that this was the best approach where we are today for the citizens of Nebraska. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator McDonald. Mr. Clerk, you have a motion on your desk?
I do, Madam President. Priority motion, Senator items first. Senator Brewer, amendments to be printed to LB 34A, and a new LR from Senator Wayne. Recognizing that the legislature offers its condolences to the family, friends, students, and the community of Elmer Joseph Crumbly. That will be laid over. Additionally, a priority motion, Senator Ibaugh would move to recess the body until 1:00 p.m.
Colleagues, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. We are recessed.